Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our 7th installment of the Murder at the Library Book Club series, brought to you by Sourcebooks and Baker and Taylor. Tonight, we're also streaming the event on Facebook Live, so welcome to anyone attending through Facebook. I'm thrilled to be here this evening with author Joseph Schneider, who will be discussing the first 2 books in his LAPD Detective Tully Jarsdall series, One Day You'll Burn and What Waits for You. Before we begin our discussion with Joseph, though, I have just a few housekeeping items to make everyone aware of. There will be 2 chances tonight to win prizes. All you have to do is participate in one of our trivia polls, or if you ask a question of Joseph, you'll be entered to win a mystery book bundle from Sourcebooks. So don't worry, I will let everyone know when the trivia question is about to start, so you'll know and be set. And if you're participating tonight via Facebook, we do have a moderator waiting there, and she will enter the question in our comment section, so we'll make sure that we'll get you captured as well. So you can just enter your answers into the comments on Facebook. If you have questions for us and are attending via Zoom, please put those in the Q&A section as opposed to the chat section, because they might get lost. Feel free to use that chat section to say hi, tell us where you're from, happy little chat like that. But if you have a specific question you want us to try and get to near the end, if you put it in that Q&A box, I'll make sure that I see it then. And if you're joining us again through Facebook, just go ahead and enter your questions in the comments there, and the moderator will feed them over to me via Zoom. So let's begin with a little background on Joseph. Joseph was born and raised in Los Angeles. He exhibited a passion for the arts from a young age, studying piano and competitive ballroom dance. When he was 16, he entered the Midsummer in Oxford drama program and decided to pursue acting. After graduating Oakwood High, he was admitted to the theater program at UCLA. In 2013, he was awarded a graduate fellowship at St. Mary's College, where he completed an MFA in creative nonfiction. Joseph's influences in crime fiction include Richard Levinson, William Link, Ira Levin, Charles Willeford, and Michael Connelly. Hello, Joseph. It's great to see you this evening.
Thank you so much. What a delight it is to be here, and thank you to all of you for. I appreciate that very much. Thanks.
Yeah. So we have a question right away from one of our participating Murder in the Library libraries, Perry Public Library in Iowa. And so we know that you grew up in LA and you still have some Hollywood contacts, which is very exciting. You actually have some background in TV, but what was your inspiration for writing books, especially police procedurals? How did you make that switch from Hollywood career to writing? And not only that, but writing police procedurals. So give us a little background on that, please.
Well, I think the answer comes in the form of unsuccessful TV career. I think is really the most accurate way to put it. I had a lot of trouble selling anything. I pitched probably 10 different projects. I sold 2 of them, but nothing I was doing was getting produced. And I kind of felt like my life was passing me by. So writing prose fiction for me was a way of doing something on my own terms where I had more creative control and where I would have the finished product, whether anyone produced it or not, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah, with a TV script, it can act as a calling card, but it really isn't finished until someone shoots it, right? With a book, you've got it, and even if nothing happens with it, at least it was a great experience composing it, and it makes you stronger, because then once it's done, that you can do it again, and that's really, I think, that was why I decided to go that way with it.
Got it. Do you find this is sort of a separate question that we haven't talked about, but you've sort of inspired me to ask this. What's the difference between script writing and novel writing? Is there much of a difference, or did you kind of seamlessly go from one to the other without much problem?
That's a really great question. There is a big difference, and I think the big difference is with prose fiction, you can spend as much time as you need in people's heads Whereas in screenwriting, you have to be able to convey everything, all of the subtext through dialogue.
Mm.
And as a result, the scenes have to be very economical. I like economical anyway when it comes to scenes. I don't like to have them drag at all, of course, anyway, but the rules are different just in terms of what you're allowed to present and how you can go about it. So yeah, it is different. And also you have to think about time. You have to think roughly a minute per page.
Yeah, so I've heard that before. I have friends
Mhm.
who've done screenwriting and they're very much like, oh, you have like your pages are a minute. And I'm
Yeah,
like, that's so different in like a novel where you kind of have some freedom there, right? It was, did you enjoy that kind of having a little more freedom there?
I did. I
Yeah.
did like having that extra bit of freedom. It's the freedom though is a bit of an illusion because you still uh, you do end up cutting a lot,
Okay.
which is great, and that's a wonderful thing. I love cutting, even if it's painful at first. It always feels good once that's done. You know?
It's easier to take away words than it is to have to add them, isn't it?
Oh, tremendously so. Yes, tremendously.
All right. So you're a protagonist, okay?
Um,
LAPD detective Tully Jarsdall. It's a little bit different from the average crime fiction detective. So one of our folks at Sourcebooks actually compared him to the TV character Monk with all of his eccentricities and quirkiness. So I'd like to know if you think that comparison is accurate, as well as tell us a little bit more about how you've kind of crafted the character of Detective Jarsdall.
I like Monk. I think he's a very cleverly written character, and in the sense that they used a weakness, which would be a weakness in most people, a debilitating psychiatric condition, and they turned it into kind of a superpower. I thought that was a really interesting idea. I think in that sense of them both being intellectuals, perhaps that's a fair comparison. I think with my guy, the reason the reason he is how he is mostly because of my own limitations in approaching the genre. I deliberately set out to write a police procedural, and I said to myself, "There's no way I'm gonna be able to compete with the kind of established genre characters that are out there. And I don't have an interest in competing with those characters because I wouldn't be able to write them authentically. So I had to ask myself, how can I turn my own limitations, my own weakness of not having a law enforcement background or a crime beat background,
Mhm.
how can I turn that into a strength? So I created a character who's essentially an outsider who comes to the profession late in life, and in that way he's kind of the audience's way in as well. I hope so. I spent a lot of time thinking about him before I even outlined the story. I had to get the character right first, and he rubs some people the wrong way. Not all readers like him, and I understand why. But his because his defense mechanism is to hide in his perceived intellectual superiority, which can get him into trouble. And but that's deliberate too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So right, so you specifically, he's former professor turned detective.
Yeah.
And did you model that on anyone that you know or a character that you were familiar with and liked? And is there any of you in Tully?
I think, my 20s were very challenging for me, because it took me a very long time for me to find myself. And I think what happened was, I toyed for a little while with the idea of becoming a, a detective. I thought it would be great to make a difference in the world in a positive way. But then I realized, I wouldn't be happy in a in an organization
Mm-hmm.
that's that regimented and rigid. And I think I'm a an artist at heart, so to speak. So I guess if there's any of me in that character, it's the desire to make a difference, to do something positive, and even if that involves a streak of idealism every now and then. Um, but other than that, hopefully we're not too similar. I already have a pretty tough time making friends as it is, and so if I had too many of his characteristics, I don't think I'd have even fewer.
So it's kind of, you can maybe sort of get some of that out on paper so it doesn't have to be in your personality, right? How about that? I think
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
maybe that's the way to look at it. So continuing speaking about the character, I think people really like to read police procedurals that aren't just straight up crimes, right? Like they love to sort of delve into that personal side of the main character as well as the professional side. So in your books, we readers learn a lot about Tully's relationship with his parents, his love interests, his decision to end his career in academia to join the police force. So why did you think it was important to kind of give us a picture of him as a whole person instead of just him as a detective?
Well, that's a really great question. There's two reasons for that. One, I think, is was the practical side for me, because I couldn't write about his vast history in law enforcement. I had to give him a backstory somewhere. So I but I also wanted to give him a reason for making this leap that no one else that he knows understands.
Mm-hmm.
That not only they don't understand it, but they are extremely skeptical and resentful. So why does he do this? Why does he throw his life away? I wanted to answer that, but I think on a broader level, to answer your question about um, why did I spend so much time with the character building. To me, character studies have always been uh, more interesting or than straight up mathematical mysteries. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, even even really celebrated mysteries, ones that the public generally loves, I can't get into all of them if I feel that it's basically a math problem. I want to be able to get into it from the character standpoint, and I feel a character can always drive the action, and for me that was. Uh, it's like if you've ever seen The Conversation, not a lot of people have seen it. It's one of Francis Ford Coppola's earlier movies. I think he did it between Godfather 1 and 2. But you have Gene Hackman's character, and if any of you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend. He plays a surveillance expert, and there's a backstory of espionage and surveillance, but at heart, this movie is a character study of this very pathologically introverted and awkward man. And I guess in a way, my character is more based on that. I think that approach to the genre
Very
is.
cool. That's some good insight. Thanks for sharing that with us. I know everybody always really, that's one of the great things about getting to talk to authors is kind of, getting in your brain to find out, like, where did this all sort of come together and piece together? Because I think it's one thing to have a story and tell a story, but to really create these full-fleshed characters is a whole different talent. And so thanks for kind of, sharing with us how you do that. So
Yeah.
so moving away from that, let's talk about some of the plot points here now for just a moment. So the crimes that you depict in Tully's stories, they're grisly, right? So in fact, Tully is considered an expert in the grotesque and uses some rather unconventional methods to try and solve his cases. So tell us a little bit about what kind of research you've done in writing those pieces of the story and how long did you do research before you started writing them? Remember, our audience here is a lot of library folks, and we love to know how authors kind of, get down and get in research and tell us. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The research for me is the great gift of writing, because you never know if the project is going to um, have any legs once it's done. But if you can come away from a project having met wonderfully interesting new people and learned new things, then in a way, the experience is paid for itself, whatever happens with it. In this case, I took a few courses with the local police department. They offered they're basically Citizens Academy courses. They're increasingly popular now as departments strive to be more transparent.
Yes.
And So I did it twice. I did it before the first book, and I did it when I was writing the second book. So I did it about 4 years apart. And I mean, tremendous information that I gleaned from those, because every week you go and you examine a different, you speak to a different head of a different department. And so one day it'll be the morgue. Next week it'll be Marine Patrol. Next week it'll be aerial reconnaissance. I mean, it's like, it's a holistic view of the entire department. So, and I'm just constantly taking notes the whole time. I also am lucky enough to have some technical advisors that I've cultivated over the years. And you'd be amazed just how generous people are when you tell them you're interested in what they do, and would they talk to you. Most people would love to do that. I also buy a lot of textbooks from
Okay.
the whatever subject I'm looking at. In fact, I have to keep them hidden in the house, because they're very upsetting. And I'll say this: I think that after this one that I'm working on now, I probably will take a little bit of a break, because it's really rough. These case files are very disturbing, and
Yeah.
and I don't know how, like, an actual homicide detective who has to look at this stuff day in and day out, I really don't know how they do it. And I know a few, and I've asked them, and they're good at compartmentalizing. Um, but so that's another reason I know it's not for me. And actually, when I took those classes at the sheriff's department, I came away every time I would say, I'm glad there are people who can do this work, because I don't have the stomach for it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't see what these people see. Um, yeah, I have a little, it's like behind my chair over there. There's a little cabinet it's the only cabinet my library with a door on it. And we keep a chair in front of it so the kids can't get in there.
Oh, that's
And
good.
yeah.
That is, that's really interesting. I never thought about that before. That, right, as a, when you read police procedurals and detectives, you kind of forget that that's a real job that real people are doing all the time. And
All the
yeah,
time.
like you said, it takes someone who can really stomach that day in, day out. And thank goodness you just have to read about it and not have to work on those cases. So that's fascinating. Thank you for that insight to that. That's very cool. All right. So one thing I wanted to bring up at this point, we'll do some trivia in just a minute, but I wanted to, when Joseph and I were chatting earlier in the week to kind of get our Zoom set up, he mentioned that he does free writing workshops for libraries who want to have their patrons come and talk about how he writes and creates the books. So right there, if you're following along in the chat, Sourcebooks has just put up a link to a Google form in the chat. If you go to that link and fill in your information to let us know that you're interested in Joseph's Writers Workshop for patrons, he can contact you about setting up an event. We had a great chat earlier in the week about how much he loves libraries and working with libraries and patrons. So take advantage of this. The folks at Sourcebooks were like, wait, what? What can we do with this? So that's very, very generous of him to offer that. So take advantage of that, please. So thanks for that, Joseph.
Sure, my pleasure.
So let's move into some trivia. So for this installment, the questions will be centered on some favorite TV cops and their titles. So if you're on Facebook Live, the question is going to be entered into the comments section. And if you're here with us on Zoom, the poll should have come right up here for you. We've got the first one is related to the TV show Chicago PD. And then those we'll cycle through. We'll give everybody a chance to kind of answer those. And while we are doing that, I'll keep chatting here with Joseph, though, because we're not going to answer those. We know the answers already. But so Joseph, just as an aside, can you tell us when you are not working with those awful case files and textbooks, what do you actually like to read for fun? And what are you reading right now?
Last night I just finished a book called City of Courts. It's a history of Los Angeles. It was, man, I wish I could write like this guy. Brilliantly written, but devastating, and kind of it was a rough read. From the history of California, I don't think people realize just how how troubled it is. This is a bloody state. You know, it's the serial killer capital of the world. It's the bank robbery capital of the world. And it's also the site of some of the most horrendous Indian massacres in the country. So when you look at the history of LA, it's rough. So this was a very eye-opening book, even for me, who I thought I knew this stuff pretty well. So City of Quartz. Last week I read a book called This is Hollywood, which is kind of a different take, but Carla Valderrama. If you have any movie lovers in your life, this is the book. It's the pictures are beautiful. It's an unconventional history of basically Hollywood's unsung and kind of forgotten stars. It's fantastic. I love history. I'm a history teacher when I'm not doing this stuff. And so I love history and I love popular science. I probably read more nonfiction than fiction. Just because I like to kind of vampirically take in whatever I can facts wise and kind of regurgitate them into my own work. So I read a lot of nonfiction. I'm a huge fan of an author named Mark Miodovnik, who wrote a book called Stuff Matters, which is all about the history of materials that we take for granted: concrete, glass, chocolate, the chocolate lab. We just did at school yesterday a big chocolate workshop, chocolate tasting for the kids. And anyway, I love nonfiction.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
You know, this sounds like you would probably make a great librarian, just saying.
I would love to be a librarian. It's how cool a job, you know. Cool
I remember my first library job, and I was like, you know, for a trivia nerd, this is so awesome. Like all day long, I just get to fill my head with random facts. It sounds like you're kind of that same personality. So
yeah, very much.
Come join us. Come join us. So, all right. Well, how did everyone do? I think the polls are closed for our trivia. So let's see here. I can go ahead and read off those answers to see how you did. So Hank Voigt's title on Chicago PD is Sergeant. So it looks like most people got that right, but not everybody. So he is a sergeant. The next one was, what is Terry Jeffords' title on Brooklyn Nine-Nine? And that's the answer. The correct answer was lieutenant. And then the third trivia question, what is Olivia Benson's title on Law and Order? And she is a captain. And oh, everybody got that one. They're like, ladies in charge. So very good. So don't worry, even if you didn't get the correct answer, it's okay. You're still entered in the drawing to win the mystery prize pack. This was not a skills test, just a fun test. So all right. So before we get into, I see lots of great audience questions coming in there, which is awesome. Before we get into that, we have one more thing that Joseph has offered us. I think we've got, I'm looking at the chat here, we're going to have another form that'll come up, another link, to a Google form. So he is offering signed book plates to any of you who would like that. So in just a moment, Sourcebooks is going to put the form up for that. They're putting in his book recommendations right now, so catch those in the chat. So again, another generous thing for Joseph to offer. Thank you so much. People always like that kind of stuff. So we'll be able to get everyone's information on that and mail you out a signed book plate for your collections. So let's move into some audience Q&A. If you are still wanting to ask one, there's time. Don't worry, we've got lots of time left, but I'm just going to go through here. Got lots of good ones coming through. So I've got the first one that came through actually from Damon, who asks, in your books, you thank a number of police people regarding their procedural input. How did you go about meeting and connecting with these people? And it looks like I've got a couple of other people asking a similar question about, tell us more about your real life contacts and sure, how you kind of culled this group of people together.
Well, a few of them I met through the Contra Costa Sheriff's Department Citizens Program, and they were a few of them there, but I think the ones that they're probably referencing are Mitzi Roberts and Rick Jackson. And I was very lucky because they're Michael Connolly's technical consultants, and I really got very lucky with those folks. Basically, my parents, who they were working on a show, which is still on Amazon, but my parents aren't on it. Right now they're on Chicago Med, actually, which is another one of the Dick Wolf shows. But they were working on Bosch, which is on Amazon. And I was at the set and I met Rick Jackson, who was there on set that day. And he had just retired, I think, from Robbery Homicide Division, which is the elite bureau downtown LA in the new police administration building. And they're the ones who handle the city's most sensitive and sensational cases, really the most high priority ones, really. And so I had heard about him because I had read a Miles book called, I was looking to see if I had it, called Homicide Special by an author named Miles Corwin. And it's a year, he got unprecedented access, a year in the life of the RHD. And so I was thrilled to meet Detective Jackson, and he retired near me. And so I just basically called him up. I sent him an email and I said, would you be willing to go to lunch with me and answer some of my questions? And he absolutely did. And so I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't met him, though, on the set, probably. And through him, he put me in touch with other people. He put me in touch with a former behavioral analysis agent at the FBI. He put me in touch with Detective Roberts, who I think is still on RHD right now. So yeah, word of mouth. And I also live down the street from a detective as well, and our kids play together. So I'm writing is a kind of, like I said, it's kind of a vampire relationship with people. So you always try to tell them, like, hey, is it okay if I mention this? Is it okay if I thank you? Some police officers don't want to be named.
Mm-hmm.
Many didn't. I said, can I thank you? And they said, please don't. Okay, I understand.
Sure. Sensitive material.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because definitely when it comes to crime fiction and particularly police procedurals, the having the facts straight is important, because otherwise, if you're just sort of making up something and filling in details as you choose, it really gives the public a weird sense of like, wait, is that really how that works? So I think that, of course, the people that you have turned into your pool of contacts are probably really appreciative that you're sort of setting the record straight, I guess, is a good way to look at that, perhaps. That,
I hope so. I hope
yeah,
so.
yeah. That's all right. So great. So we have another question come through from Nancy, who wants to know a little bit about your writing process. So you had mentioned previously that you were a teacher. So when do you find your time to work? Do you set aside hours during the day to work? Do you write when the thoughts come to you? Do you scribble them on a notepad and come back? Tell us a little bit about the writer's life, if you will.
It's not very romantic. Basically, I because I miss my family when I'm at work, and I want to spend time with them when I get home. So I usually write after they go to bed. So my
Okay.
schedule is I tend to start my writing day around 8:30 p.m. I work till about midnight, and that's every day. I have to write every day. Whether you feel like it or not, you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And my I try to write 1,000 words a day if I can. It doesn't always come off that way, but if I go to bed with less than 550, then I don't feel like I feel guilty, which of course is a very helpful emotion. But I, uh, I do write every day, even on Christmas and New Year's, even if it's only a little bit. Hemingway said, if you write a page a day, you get a book a year. And he's right. Because writing a book itself, if you say, I'm going to write a book, that's impossible. It feels impossible to me anyway. So I let the math take care of itself. If I figure, and it does, it just magically accrues. I think I reached 91,000 words last night on the third one. And I'm like, oh, wow, 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that was possible. So.
Cool. Very cool. All right. We have a question for you from Lark, who wants to know, am I on track in thinking Tully is on the autism spectrum?
Probably. I don't know if the term Asperger's is still used, but probably more there. The idea of maybe tending to correct people, in unasked for corrections, things along those lines. Yeah, I think a little bit. I never really looked at it that way deliberately
Okay.
as I wrote him, but that makes sense. That totally makes sense. Yeah, probably a little bit. Also, he has he has some splinter skills when it comes to language. He's a polyglot, and he wants to be a hyper polyglot. In the one I'm working on now, he's trying to learn Nahuatl, which is one of my favorite languages that I've always wanted to learn, and I can't. It's just it's too beyond me. The language of the Aztec Empire. Beautiful language, though. If you see it, if you ever hear Nahuatl spoken, it's just glorious. What a language. Still spoken by 1.5 million today, but
Wow.
you don't hear it very much. But man, gorgeous language. Anyway, so I love
We're going to
language.
be looking for you to incorporate some of that in the next Tully novel.
I'm going to try. The words are very long.
Those who have watched this will be like, that'll be a great Easter egg for them. They'll be like, I remember him talking about that. So you totally need to do it. Very cool. All right. So continuing on, we have lots of questions coming up about Tully. So let's keep going on with these. So I've got one here from Donna, who says, so the fun, true facts about your book's LA setting are one of the elements that elevates this series. Do you think you might have Tully travel to other places when he's called on to do his detective thing, or do you see him staying in LA? And she suggests, how about Tully on a Hawaiian holiday? Maybe you need to go do some actual research to do that. I don't know. We could, help you out with that.
I love this question because this actually anticipates the plot of the third book that I'm working on now, where he goes to Catalina Island. For most of the book takes place on Catalina. Okay. Granted, it's still in Los Angeles County, but it's really a world apart. It's off the coast. It has its own culture, its own troubled past. But it's absolutely, and I sure enough went on some very necessary research trips to Catalina to really soak up the culture, and it was painful, but you really have to be authentic. So
yeah, that must have been hard, I'm sure.
It was a drag.
Well, I think I definitely think she's given you a good idea for Tully's Hawaiian adventure.
I love that idea. I love Hawaii.
Right? So you have to get someone to bankroll that to
anytime.
make sure that your research is authentic.
Yes.
We'll back you up on that. So speaking of the research, so we have Tara and Giselle have asked similar questions. So I'm going to kind of put them all into one, and you can give us a broader answer. So Tara says, Tully provides such a broad amount of information and details. How do you decide, after you've done all your research, how do you decide what to actually include? And then piggybacking onto that, Giselle asks, how do you keep track of the plot and character details as you're writing your 1,000 words a day? How do you keep track of it all? So kind of mash those two together and give us some insight into all of this. So many details in here. How do you keep it straight? How do you decide what to leave in and what to pitch and what to,
Okay. So I love questions like this because I can answer them. I can answer them confidently because I'm a real fan of structure, and I believe that only through a rigorous understanding of technique and structure can we really achieve artistic freedom. So I try to would it be possible for me to share a screen with you? Is that doable?
I think so. Hang on, let me see. Yes, if you go down to the bottom and hit share screen, okay. I have the ability to do it, so I bet you do too.
So I use a software called Scrivener, which I think more and more writers are using these days. So you can see here. I've got, what's so great about this is if you look on the left-hand side of my screen, can you see that?
Yes.
So you'll see here, I've got every chapter is its own file. So you can keep track of everything. And so this is under the manuscript heading. So I write chapter 1, chapter 2. If I need to jump around, I just click on this and it takes me to the top of this chapter. If I click over here, it takes me back to here, right? If I
Very
want then I go down to characters. Go down to characters. I have LA character manifest, LA. I have all of my
Oh,
characters here. Catalina, all of my characters here, right? Then I have characters that end up in a diary, and I have all of them here. The reason I do this is not just to keep track of who's where, but also to make sure that none of the characters begin with the same sounding name. It's very confusing to a reader if you have
yes.
2 or 3 characters who have a similar sounding name. So I have characters, and then I also have dialogue where I just have words and phrases. See useful slang here.
Oh my gosh, this is fascinating.
So I have all of this here. Like, so in this book, I have people who affect a way of speaking. So I did a lot of research on how did people talk 300 or 400 years ago. So you can see here, I've got snotterclout, frush, smell smock, pagling. I'm a logomaniac. I love words anyway. So I do this, right? And then you'll notice here I have something where it says beat sheet, timeline. So notice how I do this, right? I've got it where it's chapter breaks down, and then I divided it by beat. So I'll have like, so that way, and then see, I put in like possible motive, and this way I can also thread in things and make sure that I'm threading in the clues properly. So this, and then you see down here, I've got maps because I want to make sure, so like
Wow.
that I know where I am. And so here's Catalina Island. I've got maps here of Catalina. So this program here, I promise I'm not getting paid to say this. Scrivener is just outstanding. It's not expensive, much cheaper than Microsoft Word. And what it just organizes your whole thing beautifully. So see, I even have here forensics investigation. And then ideas like soulmate. I discovered this recently. There's something called soulmate database just for shoe treads,
Wow.
homicide scene. The 7 stages of death. Um, anyway, I could go on and on.
Oh my
But
gosh. And we would love for you. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm just like agog right now going, wow.
so that's how I do it. And I used to use Microsoft Word. And I would have to I'd have to open up Windows every time I wanted to go back and forth. With this, I just go to the left and say, what would be a good line of dialogue? I'll go over here and check it out.
That was really cool to get
Thank
to see
you.
all of that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
amazed right now. And I'll chime in on that as a reader, yes, when you've got characters who have 2 similar sounding names, I find it really difficult to focus on who is who at what point. Like if you're doing, you know, I don't even know, but there have been several that I've read recently where I'm like, I don't even want to see a character where the name starts with the same letter as the main character because
Yeah,
I'll mess it up. And so
yeah,
that's fascinating to see you have this list to keep everything straight.
yeah.
Wow, that was really cool to see that. Thank you for
Oh,
sharing it with
sure,
us.
my pleasure.
Awesome. So awesome. All right. So let's see here. Oh, so going on to this now I've got these questions coming in about all of these details. So Leslie asks, how long does it take you to write a book when you have that many details? Does
You get better at it, like anything else. It's I wrote my first one took a very long time, and then the second one I was under deadline. And it's amazing how that it makes you move a little faster. This one it's like record time for me. I think they gave it they decided, I think in late August, something, or mid-August, somewhere around there, that we were going to go ahead with it. And so it's due in 5 days.
okay.
So basically, if you stick to your schedule, if you're disciplined, it's hard. I'll tell you a couple tricks. One, this is just tonic water and lime. I gave up alcohol completely for 2 months. Not even like the Friday night glass of wine that I would normally have. Well, let's be honest, the Friday and Saturday night and Wednesday night glasses of wine that I would normally have, because I
Gotta
don't
stay hydrated.
stay hydrated. I didn't even want to be a little fuzzy in the
Right.
last 2 months, so I had to cut that out. But I've got a bottle of champagne ready for Monday when I turn it in. You say no to a lot of things. You say no. I mean, well, there hasn't been that much socializing lately, obviously. So I haven't had to say no as much as I normally do. But I don't get to play as much,
Yeah.
and I feel bad about that. I promised my kids I'll be much more available once this is all over. But yeah, so you get faster and faster,
Just like anything, practice, right?
like
Almost
anything.
it
Yeah,
feels like practice. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. We have a question coming in from Tiffany, who's on Facebook watching us. And she wants to know, so Tully has a different love interest in each book and they don't work out. Will Tully ever find true love?
Ah,
Can you share that
that's
with us
such a
or
great
not?
question. I'm really touched by that question, actually, because it's it's a it's a painful thing, but it might be a necessary thing to deprive him of that, because often a love interest that works out brings peace to a character.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, and if he is a peaceful person, then he might not have the same fire. Um, th- I have to be brutally honest with myself as I say this also. I don't think I'm very good at writing romantic relationships,
Okay.
and I'm terrible at writing love scenes. So I just cringe at myself when I try them. So I uh in the third book, I don't think there's a whole lot of that. d- I try to play to my strengths, and I just don't think I'm very good at that. So it's unlikely that he will find true love. But I
Them's
think,
the breaks.
yeah,
So thanks for asking that though, Tiffany, but
yeah,
sorry to let you down.
it's a very good question. I think about it a lot, and my wife is annoyed. She was like, "Well, come on, It's like, nah, I'm not good at this stuff."
All right, we have, okay, so Donna is fascinated by the character name list that you showed us. She said
Sure.
Boaz. Where do you get your inspiration for character names? Are they based on people that you know? Tell us a little bit about that.
At first, they were. I think in my first book, I borrowed or cannibalized names from people that I know that wouldn't mind, But I found that when you do that, you have a little bit less freedom about what you can have those characters do, because you don't want someone to say, "Hey, well, why is my character, uh, you know, why does he commit this assault? Why'd you give him, you don't want that. That didn't happen to me, but you don't want that." So, um, where I get the names, I agonize over every single name, and I I think what I usually do, I usually look up my favorite movies on IMDb, and I go through the cast and crew list, and I find names out of there. That's what I usually do. Um,
Very cool.
and I try to be very diverse with names, because LA is one of the most diverse cities in the world. And if you look at the names of police officers on shows like Dragnet, they're very, very Anglo. But today, if you look at the map of the police, if you look at the command structure of the LAPD, it's a very multicultural organization. Thankfully, a lot has changed. Even in the last 15 years, a lot has changed in the police department. It's changing for the better, I think. Still got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
LA still has a long way to go,
Mm-hmm.
but it's better.
Very cool. All right, I've got a question here from Dana, who's watching
Mhm.
via Facebook. She actually has two questions that I'll ask you. She wants to know, um, for your dialogue, do you have conversations in your head and then write them out? And then she also wants to know if you end up having bad dreams at all from the crimes that you have to write about. So tell us a little bit about the personal effect of
Sure.
writing.
So, as far as dialogue goes, there's a great fiction writer working today. He's an Edgar Award winning writer named Lou Burney. And I went to a seminar he gave once where he said, every writer thinks they can do three things really well: um, drive, have sex, and write dialogue. And so I am, whenever I think I've written some brilliant piece of dialogue, I immediately get very skeptical and make sure that it's good. And my litmus test with that is reading aloud. I read everything I write aloud several times. And I've said this again and again. I say it to all of my students, even though they're 10 and 11 years old. I say, read everything aloud before you turn it in. Read it aloud to someone else, even if you don't think you need to, because you will catch things rhythmically that you cannot catch simply by reading with your eyes.
Yeah.
And if you have a word that's repeating again and again, or even a sound, like, you don't want accidental alliteration. You don't want Peter picked a peck of pickle, but you don't want that by mistake. And you can get that if you're, the
Right, because it looks fine on the page.
It looks fine on the page. You
Then
get
when
this
you say it, it's not
accidental
realistic. Yeah.
Dr. Seuss language. You don't want that if
Yeah.
you're not writing a children's book. So I read everything aloud, and that's my final test for everything.
Okay.
Usually 2 or 3 times. As far as what was the second part of the question?
If any of writing about the crimes gives you bad dreams at all.
Yeah, I think so. I'm generally a kind of an anxious person. I tend to worry a lot about stuff, and so I'm probably the last person who should be looking at the kind of things that I look at. I don't get so much. I don't have generally good dreams, but I think that the worst are the daily anxieties that you get after looking at this stuff. It does affect you a little bit. I think, yeah, I think you just because it's constant. You look at it, you have to read so much of this to speak about it with any degree of accuracy and fairness to the subject matter. I try to be very fair to the subject matter, and I feel it would be disingenuous to just make up what I don't know.
Got it. So bouncing off of something you had just said earlier, I have a question here from Donna, who said that she is curious about your teaching background. She saw your amazing word list, and you have just mentioned how you tell your students, read things out loud. So she's curious to know how else your writing process might have been influenced by your teaching experience.
Teaching is the greatest gift a writer can give themselves, because it's like free research, if you think about it, or paid research even, because it keeps your mind sharp. Every year after year, you get better and better at your subjects, and especially if you're teaching multiple subjects. I mean, if any of you out there are elementary school teachers or librarians, you have a huge advantage that you might not be aware of. You know so much more than than you probably know. And so every year, if I teach the Battle of Antietam year after year after year, every time I do it, I'm going to learn more about that battle, and it's going to be more and more ingrained. Who gets to do that? As a student, you get to take the Battle of Antietam once or twice. As a teacher, you get to take it all the time, every year. So teaching to me is indispensable to my work, and I never want to stop teaching. Hopefully I'll be teaching 5th grade in 50 years.
That's awesome. I have a 5th grader, by the way. I don't think
Do
we
you
talked
really?
about that. Yes, I have a 5th grader and a 7th grader.
It's a 5th grade is a magical year. The transformation that occurs intellectually and develop emotionally.
Yeah. And it's right before they become like middle school jerks. So they're still
great.
They're still nice kids a little bit.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's see here. I've got all these questions, trying to pick stuff out here. So we have so let's circle back to a little bit. We've been talking a lot about your background and how this has kind of organically turned you into a writer. So Donna wants to know, when I read your bio, mentioned that you've got an MFA in creative nonfiction. So what made you decide, I'm going to write fiction instead of nonfiction? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, oh boy, these are very good questions. So the degree is called creative nonfiction. which I'm not really, I have to tell you, I don't really know what that means. I don't know what the difference between, so
Not creative nonfiction, right?
yeah, I don't,
Boring nonfiction. Is that the
well, or like,
canon?
or true nonfiction. I
Right.
don't know. It's creative. So for me, there, and even in the program itself, they didn't emphasize, it wasn't like a journalism class,
Okay.
right? So they didn't really emphasize the, no one was turning in manuscripts about like, economics or science or history. No one was writing anything like that. It was all personal experience mostly. Yeah. And so um, I didn't really feel that I have the right at this point in my life to, or not the right, but I don't feel that I have a whole lot to write about for myself personally. So that doesn't really interest me.
Hmm.
And so fiction for me was, uh, but the technique is universal. It's like, if you take ballet, you're probably going to be pretty good at ballroom, because the mechanics are very similar. So the mechanics here were the same, and it was a matter of what I'm passionate about writing, and I love murder mysteries. So that's what guided the decision.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. So, okay, you just said how much you personally liked murder mysteries. So we
Yeah.
have a question that kind of piggybacks on that, who says, Donna would like to know, what are some of your favorite mystery series? Now, we mentioned at the beginning some of your authors that have influenced you. Do you think, so she actually points out your love of Ira Levin, because she
Oh yeah.
also loves Ira Levin. And now she
Yeah.
wants to know, do you think you might ever mash up horror, for example, or maybe another genre into a Tully story? Or are you kind of going to stick straight with police procedurals? Have you given that any thought at all?
Wow. So mashing up can work quite well, as Stephen King has showed us with his Mr. Mercedes, with his
Yeah,
Bill Hodges
yeah,
trilogy.
that's a
The
great example.
the first book is, plausible. The second one introduces a little bit of magic, and the third one is
And then we go full supernatural.
full supernatural. Um, so yeah, it's definitely possible. With this series, no, but I like the idea of that. Ira Levin's books are they're masterpieces, really, and they're kind of perfectly constructed. I just finished another one that most people don't read, called This Perfect Day, which is science fiction that he did. But like, if we just think of that, this what this guy has brought us: Stepford Wives, Rosemary's Baby, Boys from Brazil, Kiss Before Dying. Kiss Before Dying, I highly recommend to those of you who like procedurals, because it it approaches it as a how catch 'em as opposed to a who done it. And for me, a how catch 'em is what I would love to be able to do. It's almost impossible to do it in prose. Columbo did it beautifully. Monk did it very well too, where you know who the killer is, and the mystery is actually how it's going to be
Okay.
solved from the detective. For me, that actually builds more suspense. And I find how catch 'em's like Silence of the Lambs is a how catch 'em in a way, because you know who the bad guy is. But
Right.
how does she get there?
Yes.
So hard to do. So other than Thomas Harris and Ira Levin, there aren't too many how catch 'ems out there. But the Kiss Before Dying is the blueprint for the how catch 'em. So I highly recommend that book. I think I might have completely not answered the question though. I don't.
No, I think you did. We're
Did
just,
I?
right,
Okay.
just wanting to know. I think you
All right.
captured it. You captured
Okay.
it. How do it's hard to say at this point if you want to mash anything up. Maybe it'll come to you. It sounds
Yeah,
like you'd be open
maybe.
to it.
I would.
If,
I would love to try a different.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I would.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, we have about 5 minutes left in the program tonight, so I'm circling through some of these questions. We're not going to get to all of them, but I'm trying my best. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. We're going to get to a couple more here, but I wanted to take a minute to make sure everybody has looked in the chat and gone to those links for the form. If you are interested in getting yourself a signed book plate from Joseph, or if you're interested in his program for library patrons, make sure you hit up those forms. They are there in the chat. We do have a couple more questions that we can answer. So I do have a couple of people have asked the similar question here of, I just had one, being a trained actor and living in La La Land, of course, do you happen to have any thoughts on who you would like to portray Tully in a film version of your books?
Oh,
Surely that
wow.
has to have come up at some point in your brain, right?
Film version. Oh, that would be fun. As a trained actor, I like that. I'm just laughing because my acting career was not. I don't think that Hollywood, the star on the Walk of Fame, will be coming anytime soon. That was rough, and I think I actually I'm not as familiar with contemporary crop of actors as I should be.
Fair.
All the actors I think of that would have done a good job like probably 30 years ago. Like I think like
That's
like
fair.
like Jeff Goldblum, I thought, he would have been, I think, kind of perfect for it, but
Okay.
um he's pretty cool.
I can see that he's got that sort of naturally quirky,
Yeah,
right? Like that fits
yeah,
his
yeah.
style.
Well, like, yeah, his character in The Fly basically would have been,
Yeah.
which is a great movie. No, other than that though, I'm afraid not. I'm sorry to disappoint. I don't have any casting ideas.
No, that's all right. Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. All right, let's see if we can squeeze another question in here. Let's see here. I do have a lot of people who are just making comments that they enjoy reading these books because, like, we've got Lark, who has told us that their dad was an evidence technician at Chicago PD for
Oh,
about
wow.
40 years, and he's seen a lot of disturbing crimes. So we've got, people who are into police procedurals because they have a personal connection to it. So that's very cool. Let's see
Thank you.
here. We've got this is an interesting question, and I think I probably know the answer for this already. So we've got Sylvia, who is asking, she's very fascinated about that Aztec language that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah.
And
Now
if you
what?
incorporate that, would you put a glossary in the book? And I have a feeling, just based on looking at the software you showed us, I have a feeling you would be totally into doing that, right?
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. That's a really great idea. I would love that.
Yeah,
I've been watching a lot of YouTube on pronunciation, and that would be fun.
very cool.
Thank you for that thought.
Very cool. All right, so let's see. Well, we've got time to squeeze in one more question, I think, here. So let's see. I've got one. Donna says, we've now spoken a lot about, your writing process and about the settings for your books. So tell us a little bit more about your personal setting. So you've kind of given us an insight into how you write, and you write at night, and you've got your thing. Do you have music? Do you have any kind of elements that you have to have in place before you write? Or do you just sit down and go for it and it's different every night? Everybody always kind of likes that personal, we like to find out personal things about our authors.
Sure. Well, I mean, we moved into this house a few months ago, and I've kind of claimed it as my office, which has been very sweet of the rest of my family to let me have it. But there's a chair over there. I basically just sit there. I don't play music. Some writers love doing that. I don't. I find it distracting.
Too distracting.
So I work. um, This is so boring, but this is absolutely true. I just sit there and do it. There's nothing special that goes with it because I'm not always in the mood. So I just grit my teeth and grind through it. But that's all there is to it, really.
That's
I
great.
wish
We loved it. I think the question always comes up, and people are really just, we're fascinated to know these books that we love so much. How do they come to be? So
I
sometimes.
try to keep things around to inspire me visually.
Mhm.
Like I have autographs from uh, people. I just got one from Donovan. The singer who sang "Hurdy Gurdy Man." I got that.
Mhm.
I just got that, and I love stuff like that I keep around me for visual
Yeah.
inspiration for when but no, I'm sorry, no real routine.
All right. No, sometimes that's a routine in and of itself, isn't it?
Fair.
All right. So with that, I think we'll stop with the questions and say a big thank you to everyone who participated in the events tonight. If you're following in the chat, we've got Monica Wilkes, Jeanette Walker, and Tara Aldridge are the winners of our book bundles. So the three of you, please email Tiffany at tiffany.schultz@sourcebooks.com so she can get those bundles out to you. Her address is there, or her email address is there in the chat. And Joseph, it really has been a pleasure talking with you. I think, as we said when we were doing our little practice session, I always like to let authors know that, library folks, book folks, we love knowing how these books that we love get created. So thank you for sharing your process with us. And I'm still fascinated at that Scrivener program.
Yeah.
Like I want to know more about that now. That is really cool. So thanks for showing us that and telling us how you work. That's really awesome.
It's my pleasure. And before we go, I just want to thank all of you so much for joining me. This has been very special. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, yes, to everyone who came tonight. So make sure that you get on your calendar the next Murder at the Library event, which is going to be Wednesday, March 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, where I will be talking with the author of a chilling new thriller, Black Widows, Kate Quinn. So the tagline for her book is, "Blake is dead. They say his wife killed him. The question is, which one?" Dun, dun, dun. So we have, it's a clever and completely original book. You won't want to miss that, won't want to miss this event. The registration information for that event is there in the comments and in the chats. So go ahead and register for that. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you again so much, Joseph. What a delight to talk to you. Really enjoyed it. Everyone stay safe. Happy reading.